Bonjour, everyone. I'm excited to be here with all of you because I get to really nerd out today because I thought about this one with the election coming up. I figured politics is important to talk about, but it's hard to talk about politics, obviously, in this day and age because how um, jaded everyone is and how, you know, touchy people are about these types of things. And plus, I don't think it's very helpful, just from a ministerial point of view, to be talking about consistently what's going on in politics and who people should be voting for and all stuff like that, and technically illegal if you ask if you want to know. But regardless, I actually think the best way to get this point across to people is one, to divorce ourselves from the current moment and to think about other times in history, because to many of us everything seems new, but really there is nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes says. And so I think actually today what we're going to do is we're going to look at an old story, um, told by someone with a bias, certainly, and we're going to talk about that. But that a lot of the things that happen in the world involve all sorts of people in high places doing things. And while it certainly matters, I don't want to say that it doesn't matter. We're going to look at an incredibly important thing that happened in history. Although, as Americans, probably most of us are pretty unfamiliar with it, even though we shouldn't be, because it involves us pretty directly. Historically, that is. We're not America as a nation, as a place, isn't even like it is around, but to most of people in the world, completely unknown. Right? This is a story taking place in the Middle Ages, but it still is an important thing for us to realize that a lot of the ways that we usually think about people and rulership is we is very perfection based, and I don't think that really is ever warranted. And we should actually, absolutely hold our leaders to a standard. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think that, like, oftentimes we can be tricked into the games of politics into thinking that every moment is a seminal moment. Every election is the election that's going to decide the future of America. And so, with the Republican primary starting off, have been going for 2 weeks now, and really two candidates left there, and then Joe Biden ramping up his campaign for what will be the 2024 election. It seems pretty clear that we're going to be we're entering our political season, and this is the type of rhetoric that you're going to hear, right? Well, this is the most important election that's ever been, yada yada yada, and that's all time tested tactics. But we're going to go to a time when elections didn't matter, really, and where the average person, I don't want to say was disempowered, because that's kind of a lie. Just historically, there was, people who we would generally regard as peasants or being low actually did have more power than we usually think they did. But we're going to be looking at the story of a famous guy, and his conquests. His one big conquest, really. But before we get into that, I think it's important for us to start off with what I wanted to kind of use to frame this thing, which is this. I'm going to put myself up here. When we actually get to the thing I want to do, I might actually make myself really small, or put myself somewhere else. We're going to have to see how it looks. Anyway, so Psalm 146 is going to be the first thing we read. We're going to read two things. Psalm 146 says, praise the Lord, my soul. Oh, praise the Lord all my life. I will sing praise to my God as long as I live. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Blessed are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God. He is the maker of heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked. The Lord reigns forever. Your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. So right here, right, you have God being contrasted with earthly kings, princes, political leaders, we would say today, right? And they die, and when they're dead, anything they wanted to do ends with them, right? There's nothing they can do. God is the one who really is the one in control and has all this power to do these things, right? And princes are just maybe a tool that he would use. So the second one is 1 Samuel 8, famous passage. So just contextually, we're very familiar with the kings of Israel, Saul, David, and Solomon. That's not how Israel was always formed. We did a Bible study on Judges. Judges were the primary way that Israel governed itself, which was they would kind of stick to their own tribal areas. They'd have their elders. When there was a crisis, they would have a judge that would rise up and fight for them and rule over them. And that's kind of how it worked. But Samuel was the last judge, and so Samuel is getting old, as this will say. And this is going to lead into Israel asking for a king. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second son was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Now Samuel's considered a good and fair ruler, right? They don't have a problem with him. What they have a problem with is that his sons, who are probably going to take over for him, are not. And they think the solution to this is asking for a king. Now, before this, it was understood that God is going to be king. And this is what God has to say. So when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone go back to your own town." So after this point, Samuel goes away, and then he decides to find a king, and he finds Saul. And basically what happens here, right, is you can see that the Lord establishes a pattern that now that there's this political leader over you, he's going to demand things of you, and you're going to have to give them to him, right? And essentially you're going to be his servants or his slaves. And so all of this is just compounded later when they get kings that they don't like, and you see this play out in the narratives and Kings and stuff where, excuse me, well, it caught me off guard, that yawn. Sorry, I had to get up really early this morning. Where it repeats itself in the narrative as Kings, and they really have to, not rebel, but a lot of stuff happens, and you can see that the Kings abuse their power, right? As political people often do. And the hope is that you always get a good king, right? And the thing in life, and I think that this is important, what the psalm is trying to teach us, is that no king is ever perfect or ever good, completely, right? There's always going to be faults. There's always going to be things that they demand or take from people, and there's always going to be places where they're going to be able to promise but not deliver. Something we're very familiar with politicians about. So what does this have to do with what I'm talking about? Well, we're going to look at a king today, very famous king, who maybe you know of or don't know of, but we're going to look at it through a different lens than we normally do. So instead of like, well, not normally, we don't really normally look at this stuff, but maybe different ways than you'd see this online. If you were to look up things about this king, chances are what we're going to look at would be referenced, but rarely engaged with as a primary source because it's in Latin, and it's not, people will have cool graphics or whatever. I can't afford any of that, so we're just going to look at the thing itself, which amazingly exists for us to do, which I think is awesome. So we're going to go to a place in France called Bayeux, which you probably never heard of. Honestly, it wouldn't be very remarkable except if it didn't have this thing. So this thing right here is called the Bayeux Tapestry. The Bayeux Tapestry is a really cool piece of medieval art, right? And it's huge. You can kind of get a sense of it. This is the museum, so you go in and you can. I've never been. It's like on my one of my wish list things. But you kind of walk along the whole corridor, and you walk along and you can watch this tapestry, go on this tapestry, and it's a story, and incredibly cool. So you can go across. It's pretty awesome, and it has other historical stuff from this is a recreation, I suppose, but all sorts of stuff. And the tapestry tells the story of King William the Conqueror. And he's called the Conqueror because he conquered England in 1066, which is a very important year, kind of considered the beginning of what we know in history as the High Middle Ages. And this is like the time period that when you think of the Middle Ages, this is what you think of, like crusades and knights and conquests and fighting and castles and all that type of stuff. Like some of that existed before this, but it all becomes more common during this point, especially the crusades. The crusades did not exist. They start basically around 30 years after what we're going to look at here. In fact, some of the people that are in this go on crusade. So we are going to look at this, and the cool thing is before, right, if you wanted to look at this, you would have to you'd have to do it online like this, and you'd have to kind of look at pictures of what people have taken. But the awesome thing today is that it's literally just right here, right? I'm gonna make myself even smaller. Maybe I'll put myself in the bottom right hand corner over here. You can literally explore it online, and you can see this, right? I can zoom in and zoom out, and it's really beautifully digitally done. Just something to note: these numbers, these are later editions. This was not originally part of it. They were not using Arabic numerals at this point. They were still using Latin, I believe. Like the I, that thing, right? So this is a story, and we're gonna follow it, and I'm gonna give you all the details. And we're gonna, we're not gonna go through all of it piece by piece, but we're gonna see the place that religion plays in it, because I think that's important. And also, I want to show you guys, hopefully by kind of revealing some of the things that are going on in the background, how politics is kind of the same and never changes. Sure, institutions change, the way people relate to leaders may change, but humanity doesn't change. And that's really important to understand when we think about kings and princes and our roles. So the first thing to note here is that we have this guy, Edward Rex, right? So King Edward. And this is the guy called Edward the Confessor. He's King of England. He's called the Confessor because he was a very devout Christian. So if you were a Christian who, it was basically if you didn't die, if you were a great Christian, you didn't die as a martyr, you were considered a confessor because you're confessing the faith, right? So Edward, a very pious guy. At least this is historically what people believe. King of England, okay, of the English. Really, England as a concept, kind of new. So King of the English, and he is pointing at this dude, and this dude's name, right? You can see that right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see him kind of pointing. He's the one with the crown, if you can't tell, the scepter. He's pointing at this other guy, right? And that's this guy, Harold, Duke of the English. You know, they didn't use the term Duke. That's a French term. That would have been Earl of the English. And his soldiers, right? That's him with the little falcon that's on his hand there. And they're heading out. So he gives him a message to send to someone. So he's heading them out. He's going. They go to the church, ecclesia, right, to be blessed before they go off for their journey here. They, you're drinking and feasting. They're enjoying themselves, and they get on the ship. You can see them pulling up their pants. You can, if you want to like see how things happen, like you can just see like they pull up their pants, right, and they go onto the boat because they don't want to get their stuff wet, their pants wet, right. So they get on the boat. They go across the English Channel, and they set foot in Normandy. Now, every single part of this just is in this Latin, like you can see it, right? So you can see like hic, which is here, apprehended, Guido, Heraldo. So here, Guido, which is like an old name, which is where we get the name Guy. Maybe you've heard someone called Guy before, or the Italian name Guido, right? Or in French, Guy, right? So, which they would have been speaking at this time a form of French, not modern French, but a form of it. So this Guy apprehends him when he comes onto the shore of Normandy. And so Normandy, just for you don't know, like I'm sure you've heard of the D-Day landings, right? That was Normandy, the Battle of Normandy. So it's right across from England. And that's where they're going. It was founded by Vikings who were given the land by the King of France, basically to defend France from other Vikings. And they're called Normans, which is Northmen, right? So Norman. So Normandy, which is where Bayeux is. So you can see here that they meet him, right? And they begin to take him to a place called Belrem. And they bring him to Guy, and they're talking, bringing his message, right? And they meet with the messengers of a guy called William. And William is a important guy. So he was known as William the Bastard, and that's not it could be an insult, but it's not an insulting epithet. It's because he was an illegitimate son of the previous duke. The fact is that the duke before him, William's father, didn't actually ever have any legitimate children. He was not a married one from married wife. He never got married, but he had a bunch of kids out of wedlock. And so William, after he dies, ends up kind of asserting himself to the throne. We're going to meet a few other William's half-brothers here, especially an important one. And he basically asserts his control over Normandy through strength. And so William of Normandy is the leader. He's kind of the head of the region here. Reports kind of directly to the King of France. And he has a lot of ties in England. He's a distant relative of the family that Edward the Confessor is from. And this message that Edward the Confessor is saying, because Edward never had any children, is he's telling Harold to bring William a message saying that William is going to be King of England. So he's leaving the Kingdom of England to William. All right, so they're meeting with his messengers here. This is now they're going to William, and this is they're meeting with him, and this is they're like they're basically gathering everyone. That's what's happening right here, right? So his messengers, this is the messengers coming to William and being like, hey, this is happening. So they're all coming together to meet and talk. And so this is where they meet together, and this is the messenger And the messenger here is telling William about things that happen, and about this message that's being brought. He's also telling William about this right over here, which is a scandal revolving around this. It says ubi, so like when, and so he's talking about when this cleric and Elphigi. And that's all it says, but I think what's implied is that there was a sexual scandal between this old English queen and a priest, which basically throws everyone's on the England's legitimacy, because remember, it passed by bloodline, into question. So what William is arguing, or like what's being argued here, is that no one else has a legitimate claim to the throne of England, because we don't know whose child, right? Okay, so you can see that, and there's reasons that scholars think that about that. I think that that's probably right. So again, they meet at Monte Michel, which is Mont Michel, which is a place in France. Here, Harold like falls into the water, but he's saved. All that type of stuff. And then there's all sorts of adventures they go on. They're all trying to meet. William kind of helps him with fighting and things like that. We're going to skip over this. The point is that Harold eventually gets to William. And this is really important right here. So, Harold right here, you can see this is William on the left, the one with the sword kind of pointing. And the one on the middle is Harold, and you can see he has hands on two of these boxes. What are these boxes? Well, these are relics. And this is when he swears an oath to William, saying that he's going to support his claim to the throne. He puts his hands on the relics and says, all right, I'm going to support you. And something to note is that this is left out of this, and we're going to talk about who made this tapestry and where it is, and the bias that's behind it. But you can see one important thing to left out is that William also has some of Harold's family as hostages at this point. And so one could say that, and this is what Harold will argue when it comes to it, that, you know, this is kind of a forced oath rather than a legitimate one. But anyway, he swears that he's going to support William's claim to the throne of England. And that's the news that Edward the Confessor has sent Harold with, right? He said, I want to make out William my heir. You're going to tell him. And when he does, Harold swears fealty to him, right? He's going to say, I'm going to support you. So they go back to England, right? All right, great. So they go back towards Anglicum Terram, the land of the English. And they get back to Edward the Confessor, and he's not doing too well right here, right? You can see he looks a little haggard, right? And you can see him pointing towards Harold over there. And this is interpreted as something that happened in history, which we'll talk about. And he dies. And here they're taking his body to the church. So he dies, and it's believed that this right here, well, after his death, the thing that Harold will claim is they'll claim that Edward actually made him King of England. So yeah, you see there's two competing people here, right? There's another guy, but he's not in the tapestry, so we're not going to worry about him. There's William, who got the message from Edward saying that he's going to become king afterwards. And then you see Harold being told here, and this seems to be William's side acknowledging it, because this comes from a Norman perspective, that, yeah, Harold was also told that he's going to be made King of England. And now there's going to be, we're going to have to decide. And of course, you know, how are we going to decide? We're going to decide through fighting, right? So they bring the body of King Edward here to the church. You can see the hand of God right there. Again, very Christian this time period, right? It's not as though they're pretending. A lot of people like to think it's cynical. This is serious. So they're brought to, here, the corpse of Edward, King, is ad ecclesiam sanctus Petri Apostoli. So brought to the ecclesia, or the church of St. Peter the Apostle. And so, you know, they put the body there. This is him dying. Put the body, right, and they're telling Harold about this. And then he is made hic Hic residet. So here sits Harold Rex, King Harold, Anglorum of the English. And then you have a bishop, Stigant, Archepiscopus. Right? So that's the bishop, crowning him Harold. All right, he's the king. Harold's the king of England. And then this happens. This is fun. Isti Mirant Stellae. So they see a star. You can see right here, right? And I remember Ancient Aliens. This is the star right here. It's a flying shooting star, right? Ancient Aliens will be like, it's a rocket ship. It's not a rocket ship. It's a star. It's a flying star. So they tell him, and this is in the Middle Ages, right? And you can imagine in lots of other places, stars represent, especially shooting stars represent omens. Like, what is this going to mean? So they tell Harold about it. All right. So William finds out. He's upset. So they begin making ships, and you can imagine what they're doing, right? They're making ships. They're loading them with arms and armor here. And they get on the ships, and they're going to sail. And they land at a place called Pevensey, which is in South England. They unload the horses, and the guys are getting off, right? And they rapentir, rape, but it has this idea of taking animals and food, and they're making it here, right? They've taken, this is all English people's food, right? Peasants and stuff that they've stolen and now are eating. And they're eating it and they're enjoying it, and look at them, look at that, they're having a great feast. And then this is where we meet the guy who commissioned the Bayeux Tapestry. This guy. And this, right? Et hic, and here, Episcopus Sibut et Potu benedictit. So the bishop, food and drink, blesses. So he blesses the food and the drink. And that is this guy, Odo. You can see that they're the same guy. Odo Episcopus. He is William's half-brother, one of their father's numerous illegitimate children. He's the bishop. He was made bishop when he was 14. Not a great thing, but it just goes to show how things worked back then. And you can see that he's with William on this crusade. And this was found at his cathedral in Bayeux, which is why we call it the Bayeux Tapestry. And he probably had it made and decorated the sanctuary. So, today, like, we'll talk about whether or not it's important to have, or whether or not it should be okay to have, like, flags or other things that are nationalistic symbols in the sanctuary. Well, could you imagine if, like, I was the president's brother, and like I hung up a whole tapestry celebrating his and my accomplishments and helping him like become president or something like that. Like that's what this is, right? In the sanctuary. And William, and this is Robert, another one of their brothers. And so, again, this is them building forts and things like that. And they're burning villages, because this isn't really said here, but basically Harold is off fighting another guy who's trying to take the throne, and he doesn't really want to deal with William. He's going to kind of let him just sit in the south and starve, but then they start to burn villages, and you can see here like a peasant family being burned out of their home, a mom and her son. And this basically causes Harold to act, because now he's burning villages and stuff, and so they're going to go fight. And so they are going to fight against Harold the king, and this is William right here on the horse. And then he's like, no, Harold's coming. This is the guy saying that. And they're all getting prepared. And, he's giving a speech to his guys. And he's telling them to be wise and courageous and all sorts of stuff, right? And so they're fighting. This is them fighting. Basically what happens in the Battle of Hastings, this is fought at a place called Hastings, is the English are kind of at the top of a hill, and the Normans continually charge up with horses, which the English don't really have a lot of. But they're continually beaten back, and eventually, but you'll see what happens. So they're fighting, right? Fighting. And it's just kind of just describing, this is the brothers of King Harold are killed right here in the fighting. This is, you can see just the chaos. I mean, really beautiful art if you look at it, right? Like the fact that someone made this and was able to do it, like you see the liveliness to it. I'm not saying it's like the best thing ever. You can kind of see the hill. Remember the Normans are charging up this hill and fighting, and so You can see that here. It's tough to fight uphill. I've heard it's quite steep, although I've never been. This is William right here. I think he looks funny. That's him. Um, kind of in the middle of the fighting here. And this is just all to show. This is King Harold right here. He's killed in the fighting. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the battle is over, and you can see that the tapestry ends with the English being defeated and the Normans victorious. You can see all the dead and dying people on the ground, people without limbs. You can see here people stealing the chainmail off the dead bodies, which is something that would happen, right? You'd take armor and weapons off people and things like that. And it's really interesting because you have the big thing up here, but if you pay attention to the bottom, there's lots of other pieces of it as well that are going on. So all this is just to say that is I wanted to give you guys a story of a political thing that happened, and it has a bias, right? Because this comes from the Norman perspective. So again, you're not told, but we know from other records that William had Harold's family in his castle as kind of hostages, which makes sense as to why Harold would say, "Yeah, I'm gonna serve you," but then he goes back and he doesn't, not defending anything, right? But then it ends up being a fight, and you have these guys who really aren't always the best morally, but are constantly kind of in control. And this is all tied in with what God wants, right? Because the idea at this time period was when the king is a king, he's ruling because God has placed him there, right? It's not like today where we place the president where he is. It's no, God placed the president or the king where he is, and because God did that, you have to respect them and things like that. And but they're human, right? They're getting into these squabbles. They're maneuvering around each other. They're not always the best guys, right? And the reason I bring this up is because I want to just remind people that politics, there's nothing new. That's kind of the point of why I think the Bayeux Tapestry is really cool. Not only is it a really cool historical piece, a piece of art, right, where you can see all these wonderful things, and you can explore this yourself online. They actually also have a translator, I believe. So, I think it's somewhere over here. You can check my translations. I'm I don't know if I actually got it right, some of them. I'm guessing kind of based on some of the words I realize, but also some of the things I don't. There is a funny one here. I must have just been going too quick where I skipped over it, but there's a point where the bishop, his brother, is in armor, and he's encouraging all the guys fighting, but I can't remember exactly where that is. Oh, it's right here. Yeah, here Odo Episcopus, he has this little staff or club, and he's it's encourages the boys. Pueros right here, so he's encouraging them, and you can see he's fighting alongside them. Some people believe he's not. This is in the back. Maybe he's not, but you can see that even members of clergy were involved in battles, right? He's not just there to bless food. He's also fighting alongside his brother, and he would actually go on crusade. I think he dies on crusade, of sickness or something. Oh, maybe he doesn't. I don't remember. But he definitely goes on crusade. So this is so he's young. He's probably in his 20s or something at this point. But anyway, right, that there's just these people in politics. And I really think oftentimes we are told that we are going to be that we have to think of the most we have to think of everything as being the most important thing ever. And this is not how we should be viewing these things. It is important, right? So the importance of this. Now you may be okay, well, why is the Norman conquest of England important? Well, the Norman conquest of England is important because it's where we get the modern English language from, and it's where we get all sorts of other things that come down to us from, because basically the Norman culture and the English culture, Anglo-Saxons, merge, and that's what creates England as we kind of recognize it now. and English culture, and that of course comes to the United States, which is what our primary influence, right? So like all of this is really important, um, even though it's something that we aren't usually aware of because we don't have enough time. Maybe they teach about the Norman Conquest. I don't think so. I wasn't taught about the Norman Conquest. It's not a failing of our history teachers, right? It's just we don't have enough time. I bet you learn about it in the UK if you grew up there. Um, but this is all just to say that like we are consistently told again and again that everything that politics is incredibly important, that we have to be caring about these things as though it's the end of the world, but it's not, right? Don't put your trust in princes. Like massive changes has happened. Some of these things you aren't even aware of unless you go out and look for them, and that God is in control of all these things, right? And I think that that should give you pause when it comes to thinking about all politics as the end of the world, which you shouldn't, because you should remember that God is in control. Um, but also, it should make you understanding that like what is going on now, or like if there are people in political power that you don't enjoy, they're not going to be there forever, and that God's plans will be fulfilled, even if it's hard to see kind of how that's going to happen. And this is something that people have had to deal with for centuries and for millennia, going all the way back to Israel, right? Because you're going to realize if you keep reading in First Samuel that Saul, the first king, doesn't really live up to the hype, and Samuel is disappointed by that, and many other people are. But God's plan still goes forward, and He replaces him finally, way down the line, way down the line, with a perfect king, which is Jesus, right? And that's kind of the one that we are ultimately responsible to above everything else. So, just thought that was important to get across. I figured that the Bayou Tapestry was a fun way of talking about politics and how people can be scheming against each other, and no one's really always good, and how very important things can happen, and we're unaware of them, but God is still working, right? So, all that's great. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you guys on Sunday for worship, and then more more stuff next week. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace out.